The Further Education of OverSoul 7 by Jane Roberts, read by Martin John. Chapter 7. Some Assembled Gods. Looking down from the mountain, Zeus said, "They're at it again. Their energy and persistence is really incredible." Christ answered, "Verily so." "Yet they keep changing the rules," Zeus complained. He leaned back on his velvet couch, surveying the worlds and times that flickered outside of the castle-sized picture windows, drank his wine, and idly fingered the divine spider plant on the bronze table by the divan. Christ just smiled. Then he said, "I don't know what you're complaining about." "Oh, the crucifixion," Zeus said. "I'll grant you that was no fun." "Yet the whole concept was," Christ said nostalgically. "There were great moments when I thought I almost got through to them. Jerusalem wasn't Olympus, but the saga was there. The excitement and educational contrasts." The two of them sat up quietly for a moment that lasted for centuries, each lost in his own thoughts, watching the nights and dawns flicker off and on across the earth and all of the earths below and around. For outside of the God place, times and spaces blew gently past the windows, and the path in the stately gardens outside connected worlds. Such a place doesn't exist in usual terms, of course, but in, well, extraordinary terms, in palaces of the psyche, in an inner world that is as separated and personified as you and I and as all of the readers of this book. So in that sense, Zeus and Christ and Muhammad and all of the gods do all sit conversing. And in that sense, OverSoul 7 goes out seeking the gods. Castle or not, however, nothing could conceal the fact that this was an old god's home. Zeus kept dozing. Christ now and then had nightmares about the crucifixion. And in one of the courtyards, Muhammad flashed his fiery sword. But none of the attendants even pretended to get out of the way anymore, or played scared, so that Muhammad just kept flailing away at the infidels, cutting their bodies in half or into a zillion pieces, which were all in the next moment magically repaired. It was enough, dear Allah, to take the joy out of killing. Muhammad sighed, and Allah, mechanically clapping on the sidelines, was bored. No one there, Zeus thought, and had anything really left but memories. "But what memories?" Christ answered aloud. "Still pathetic. They're still fighting about me on earth, even now, and waiting for a second coming. That'll be the blessed day. I'd really have to be crazy to go back there." Zeus lifted his steel black, thicker than forest eyebrows, and said with a thunderous enough laugh, "Come on now, you love it. They still think of you, and it's the only thing that keeps you going. Admit it." A flash of the old zest illuminated Christ's eyes, so that the electron worlds within his pupils veered dangerously, and on forgotten islands in time, small volcanoes erupted. "I should go back and teach them all a lesson. Hypocrites and liars," deliberately twisting a god's words. "Hypocrites and liars. Christ banged his golden cane on the massive floorboards, sending sharp splinters of light everywhere, and Zeus said smoothingly, "Forget it. It's all past now, and don't go into a tantrum. You'll make it rain in where is it? Ohio? Last time you carried on, they had a flood. That's nothing compared to what you did in Greece, and the entire Mediterranean for that matter," Christ said, recovering. But then he shook his great head, untended graying curls cascading to the shoulders of his slightly stained sky blue robe. "Still, it's sad," he said. "This whole place is just filled with old gods. Half of them have forgotten who they are, and no one comes to visit except those whiny petitioners. Bad enough, they call me by my first name." "You always did get depressed easily," Zeus said. "We'll rouse again. You wait and see. And if one of us does, we all do, of course." Into the splendidly appointed solarium came a dark, bent-over, tottering but massive figure of a goddess, gray hair kinky and wiry, with leaping electricity, eyes a fury of autumnal ecstasy, ponderous, yet so compelling in her mood of dejection that the whole room momentarily darkened. Christ and Zeus eyed each other with a worried air. Zeus coughed apologetically, as he always did when Hera, his wife, came out of her private quarters. She was quite insane. She thought she wasn't a god at all. She even believed she was human on bad days, which lasted for centuries, of course. "She doesn't have a believer left, poor thing," Zeus said. Hera sat down in the throne-like rocking chair with silver gliders, her face darker than the deepest twilight. She stared out the multi-dimensional windows for a while, then said finally, "It's you two who are mad. We aren't gods and goddesses. We never were. We're all deluded. I'm the only sane one here. You're obsessed, Christ, with his crucifixion, you dear husband with your claims of power, Muhammad with his magic sword and all the rest, and Christ keeps seeing the head of John the Baptist on a platter carried by one of the dancing girls. Divine delusions, obsessions. Sad enough that you've deluded yourselves, but world upon worlds? I can't bear to think about it. If it wasn't that I had Pegasus for company, I would lose what mind I have left." And when she said his name, Pegasus appeared, his huge wings decorously folded over his sleek horse back. He'd been galloping to keep in shape for the best part of the century, and now he sauntered over to Hera, smiling with his fine horse teeth. "Still talking about the same old thing. You all need exercise. You know, that's your trouble. You need a good workout." He strutted slightly but nicely and added, "I don't mean to brag either, but being a god and an animal both does seem to give me certain advantages." Absent-mindedly, Hera stroked Pegasus' hide, while Zeus turned speculative eyes towards Christ. "Suppose Hera's right," he said. "I mean, suppose her insanity carries a certain understanding of issues." Of course she's right and utterly wrong at the same time, Christ replied. Zeus frowned his famous frown. Now you sound like Buddha, he said irritably. He can't give a proper yes or no either. Wow. I'm going to try that again. He can't give a proper answer. Excuse me. He can't give a proper yes or no either. He's never even... This is silly. Okay. He's never even made up his mind if he likes existence to begin with. Pegasus' divine animal nature got the best of him. Gently he disentangled his mane from Hera's stroking fingers and said heartily, "Forgive me. This closed-in atmosphere really gets on my nerves. And I don't give a hoot if people remember me or not. Though it's nice when someone does. I can always go out and gallop beneath the stars and nibble the grasses. And I'm only sorry you can't do the same." He probably doesn't even gallop at all, but uses his wings the minute he's out of sight, Christ muttered sourly. Pegasus heard the remark, but ignored it. In his more sardonic moments he thought that it was his animal nature rather than his divine one that was his salvation. For it was the creature part of him that delighted in details, yet basked in a kind of generalized, diffused good spirits that could also be quite gargantuan. Now, outside for example, he could appreciate the tiny trembling of the earth beneath his hooves, sense the dirt sliding beneath the surface, small earth sides that slightly shifted the tunnels in which the cool worms slid, and enjoy the summer moon that ever so slightly lightened the roots of the grasses, its rays traveling downward, staining the sliding underground worms with the slightest tint of silver. Yet he could, when he wanted, use his wings to soar into the skies and mentally to send his spirit into realms that were extraordinary even in divine terms. Now he nibbled the grass thoughtfully. There was something in the air, a hint of change, a foreign scent. He perked up his ears. Extraordinary! There were visitors on the ledges below. The other gods frequently got lonely. On several occasions they'd gone on pilgrimages to find some followers, but each time unfortunate circumstances cut short their journeys. Again, being the god of inspiration gave him another edge, Pegasus mused, because his own thoughts were as lively as any company, mortal or divine. In fact, he often thanked his thoughts for their vivid and companionable nature. But now there would be a banquet, perhaps, some cheer, excellent conversation, and surcease from the eternal boredom of the other gods. No, boredom wasn't the right word, Pegasus thought. The gods were never really bored. It was just that they didn't feel wanted anymore. They'd been put out to pasture, so to speak. They really didn't have any duties to perform. He didn't either, in the old aspected manner, but he had his robust animal nature, and someone or other was always asking for inspiration, even if they didn't know where it came from. Actually, Pegasus mused as he trotted along. He was called upon in one way or another a good deal of the time, but people often forgot his animal characteristics, or worse, his playful ones. "Ah, well," Pegasus neighed, and headed towards the visitors. OverSoul 7 heard the hoof-beats first and cupped his ear. While Pegasus was still in the distance, he neighed a welcome so as not to startle anyone. He reveled in the sound himself, for it was the quintessence of each and any of all horses neighing in greeting and triumph. He stomped up and down, the magnificent muscles luxuriating in each motion. He neighed again, aware of his fine form beneath the Olympian sky, while the full moon shone brightly on all the peaks and ledges. "What on earth was that?" Lydia gasped. "Why, it sounded like a gigantic horse or 100 horses," Joseph said, growing uneasy. Pegasus came slowly and majestically out of the shadows. His godlike, animal-like natures merged so perfectly that even OverSoul 7 just stood there for a moment, staring. Barnyards of Earth's past and present and future joined in Pegasus' form, so that before Seven's and Lydia's and Joseph's eyes rose images of barns and meadows and wars and battlegrounds. There were horses bravely carrying men, forgetting their own terrors, as swords flashed and cannons roared. Horses hitched to plows tilling the earth. The odors of manure and grass and grain all intermingled. All this was sensed in one way or another by Seven, Lydia, and Joseph, until the animal part of Pegasus alone was godlike in proportions. But besides this, yet rising from it, Pegasus' divine attributes became natural and physical. Nature knowing itself as a horse, glorifying in power and speed and filled to the brim with creaturehood. Lydia, who had never been a horsewoman, was terrified at first. Joseph, who loved horses, was awed and almost appalled by his own reactions. He identified with Pegasus' sense of power, imagined the beast galloping down dark hills, and he shuddered, almost dizzy with elation. OverSoul 7 wasn't just elated. He was sedated and restored. His earth nature had seemed to grow new roots in the few moments since the arrival of Pegasus. 7 smiled. Suddenly he understood Lydia's need for a place of her own in the universe, and he felt himself as the earth-root soul out of which all of his personalities emerged. At the same time, he experienced a rush of almost unendurable sorrow. It vanished almost at once, but lasted long enough for him to sense the sharp private earth realities in which each human individual lived. 7 was so fascinated by Pegasus, though, that he'd taken his attention away from Joseph, who had just noticed Pegasus' wings, and was muttering, shaken, "I never saw a horse with wings before," and for a moment Joseph's consciousness was in two places at once. Elgren Hosenhoff said anxiously, "Hear that?" talking about a horse with wings? He's really delirious." They were unsaddling in the barnyard, where the horse manure steam in the cold air, and with great shouts and bustily they managed to get Joseph inside to the kitchen. His mother-in-law yelled, "Quick, sit him here." She opened the oven, thrust Joseph's legs into the door so that his feet were inside, took out the bricks she'd heated, covered them with rags, and placed them between Joseph's body and the chair arms. The fire inside the stove was raging. She threw in more kindling, and this time Joseph kept opening and closing his eyes and muttering about the horse with wings. For a few moments he didn't feel anything. Then the burning, tingling, itching sensation started beneath his woolen stocking. A sodden, wet, smelly odor rose. Someone grabbed his feet and removed the stockings, which had been nearly frozen to his feet before, and Joseph snapped to. He looked down to see his feet, distant, purple, swollen hulks that seemed to... Okay, I have read this before. He looked down at his feet, distant, purple, swollen hulks that seemed to belong to someone else. His mother-in-law was trying to force hot cocoa down his throat. One of the cats, having sneaked in from the barns, jumped on his lap and was indignantly chased by a serving girl. "You damn nincompoop," Elgrin began. "Trying a fool trick like that at a time like this?" Joseph moaned, closed his eyes again, and pretended to be unconscious so as to avoid the coming lecture. In Chapter 7, Peace, Light, and Love. Aloha.